Look, there's absolutely no doubt that now is the best time to get into the world of no-code. When I first started out, the tools and techniques available were limited, but now there are a huge range of resources that can make the entire process much easier and more pleasant. And with the right guidance, you can quickly get up to speed on the latest no-code tools and create incredible apps that don't require any coding experience. Being able to build apps no longer requires having a tech background or a computer science degree. In today's video, I'll provide you with a comprehensive step-by-step guide to creating the apps of your dreams without writing a single line of code. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps, all the resources that I'm going to be talking about in today's video, you will be able to view and or clone on my Patreon page, and you're going to find a link to it in the description below. The first thing you need to consider is the kind of app you're going to be building, namely, is this app going to be a mobile app? Is this going to be a web app? Or is this going to be primarily a desktop app? Or is this going to be an app that's going to be suitable for all platforms? And it's just going to change how it looks depending on which platform the user is running that app on. That is the first thing. The next thing you want to be thinking about is the UI. You want to be asking yourself, how is the user going to be interacting with this app? What is the user going to be seeing? How many screens are going to make up the main flow of the app? Is the app going to have various subflows? Is this going to be an app that the user is going to need to input lots of data? Or is this going to be primarily an app where the user needs to input minimal data and you're going to be able to provide lots of data to the user? But most importantly, you want to be asking yourself, what is the main flow of the app? What exactly is the main selling point of the app that once the user is going to experience this, they're going to realize that this app is going to provide a lot of value into their lives? And you need to think about how you're going to be presenting this flow. So let me show you a couple of examples. So here I have various diagrams of the apps that I've built before. So for instance, here we have a FlutterFlow car portal app. Okay, this is going to be an app that's kind of modeled on Airbnb, where if you have a car, you'll be able to rent that car out to other people who need a car. So kind of that same flow that Airbnb has, where people rent out their apartments, rent out their rooms. But we also have something like an e-commerce store, right? We have a homepage, we have products, we have a cart, we have a checkout. This is a completely different flow and a completely different process than the previous app. Another example is a CMS. Okay, so we have a CMS, which stands for a content management system. So here we have a homepage, we have a list of articles. You can view each article's detail. You also have a login page, so a user can log in, they can authenticate, and not only that, they can also be authorized to have access to different parts of the app. Here we have a list of articles. We can create a new article. You can delete an article, edit an article. Next, we have a Tinder, right? This is a dating app flow right here. And this is a completely different app than pretty much all the previous examples that I've talked about thus far. And here, the main flow is that whole swiping behavior, right? Swipe left, swipe right. You'll get notified of new matches. You can take a certain action on the match depending on if you want to kind of connect with them or not. So this is a completely different flow. And most importantly, the flow in each of these apps is the app's main selling point. And so when it comes to an app like Tinder, it's not really about profiles and accounts and the UI per se. It's more about the actual flow, the fact that you can swipe left, swipe right, and get a match, or you can connect to the person that matched you before. That is the main flow. And same thing when it comes to something like Uber Eats. Okay, so we have a restaurant list, we have the products they sell, the dishes, the dish details, but you also have the tracking aspect. Okay, so once you order a meal, you also have the tracking aspect. And so one can argue that something like Uber Eats has various flows, right? You have this kind of standard kind of CMS type flow, but you also have the tracking flow when you can actually track what the delivery person is doing, where the delivery person is. Are they, by a house? Are they like, 20 minutes away? Are they still preparing your order? That status tracking is an entirely different flow from kind of picking the restaurants and picking the dishes and placing your order, but that is also a very, very important flow. We also have a Twitter clone, right? So here's a Twitter flow here, and in this example, we have the standard flow, we have a login, we have a register, we have homepage of tweets, we have people I follow. So there's lots of things happening, but it's important to keep in mind that the real flow here is me seeing the content that I want. I want to see content that's from people I follow or content from people that are similar to those people I follow. So, in other words, recommendations. That is the real flow. UI is nice. Being able to register is nice. Being able to see lists of accounts is nice. But the key here and the main selling is getting that content that I care for. I don't really care for content that's, completely from a completely different sets of people that I'm not really following. And so I want to get content from people that I connect with, content that I like. So that is very, very important when it comes to Twitter, but also when it comes to different social media apps. And so at this stage, I would highly, highly encourage you to start with maybe a diagram app, but even better, a piece of paper and a pen. That is exactly what I do myself. I have a notebook and I have a pen, and I basically draw a diagram of how I want every little piece of the app to interact, as well as the flow. And that gives me a better idea what kind of app I'm going to be building. And later on, things are going to be much simpler and much more straightforward. Once you've narrowed down how your app is going to look, how your app is going to function, the flow of the app, the various flows, how different pieces of the app are going to interact with each other, it's now time to pick a no-code tool. And there are tons and tons of different no-code tools because there are various things that each no-code tool does better than another tool. And some tools are more complex than others. Some tools are more limited in the features than others. And so it really is going to depend on what kind of app that you want to be building. But the three tools that I've used and I can wholeheartedly recommend are FlutterFlow, Bubble, and Adalo. And so, depending on the kind of app you're going to be building, I would encourage you to take a look at one of these tools, or even better, if you can take a look at all of these tools and perhaps try to build an app using one of these tools, or perhaps try to kind of play around and seeing which tool you like better. These are three main tools that I like at this point in time. And I would say Adalo is probably the simplest tool. And so if you can build the app that you want to build in Adalo, I would just recommend going with Adalo. Whereas tool builders such as Bubble and FlutterFlow are much more complex with a much richer feature set. And as a result, you can build very, very complex apps, but the learning curve is going to be a lot steeper as compared to a simpler tool such as Adalo. And so depending on the kind of app you're going to be building, I would highly encourage you to check out one of these tools and decide which one of these tools is best for you. I have tons of videos on each of these tools on the channel, so you're free to check it out. I'm going to have links to playlist in the descriptions, but ultimately it's really up to you which one of these tools you are more comfortable with. Now, after you've decided what kind of no-code tool you're going to be using in order to build the app, the next thing you want to think about is your storage backend. This is going to be the place where all of the data pertaining to your app, pertaining to your users, is going to be stored, and essentially where the data is going to be read from and written to via the app. Now, when it comes to storage backends, there's several things to consider. The first thing is that which storage backends does your no-code tool support? Some no-code tools have their own built-in storage backend. So tools such as Adalo or Bubble and several other tools, they have their own storage backend. And so in that case, it's a good idea to kind of take a look at what their storage backend is, how it works. Is it a relational? Is it a non-relational? And go from there. But generally speaking, there are three main storage backends that I like and can recommend. The first one is Cloud Firestore, which is part of the Firebase offering. And this is a backend that's used by a tool such as FlutterFlow natively. And so chances are, if you're going to be using a tool such as FlutterFlow, which is a great no-code builder, you are most likely going to be using Firebase because it's supported by FlutterFlow natively. Still, another backend that I would highly recommend is Supabase. Supabase is very, very similar to Firebase, except there are several important differences to keep in mind. Number one, it's open source. And number two, the database that you're going to be using inside of Supabase is a relational database, whereas the database inside of Firebase, the Cloud Firestore, is a non-relational database. And so depending on which database model you're more comfortable with, also depending on the amount of data you're going to be storing, if your app is going to have tons and tons of different tables, lots and lots of relationships, then maybe a relational database is more appropriate for your needs. Whereas if you're going to be storing lots and lots of data and relationships are not as important as performance, then perhaps something like Firebase Cloud Firestore might be a much better fit for you. On the other hand, if you're looking for something more powerful than Firebase, something more powerful than Supabase, you're looking for a backend that can pretty much do it all, that can give you a place to store your data and give you some authentication, some authorization features, as well as a direct API access. I would highly recommend Xano. This is available at xano.com. And this is kind of all in one backend. It does lots of things. It does more things than Firebase. It does more things than Supabase. But I have to admit, this could be an overkill for relatively simple projects. So definitely take a look at the kind of app you're building and ask yourself, are you going to be storing lots of data? Is managing that data important to you? Do you need relational features? Do you need an API in order to access that data? Definitely check out Xano. This is the no-code backend to power and scale any app. It's a very, very complete product, but only in situations where you're really going to be working lots with your data, and also in situations where the tool you're going to be using does not have native support for either Supabase or Firebase. Now, the next thing you want to ask yourself is whether your app needs to access third-party data. Are you going to be building the kind of app that needs to access some kind of a third-party resources in order to kind of supplant itself with data it might not have from the start? Perhaps you're building an app like a currency conversion app. And so in this case, it's really not possible to download all the currencies, all the exchange rates at once and store them inside of your app. In these kinds of apps, you will need to constantly download new exchange rates. So maybe it's going to be done every hour, or perhaps it's going to be done every day, but you simply cannot store all that data. You will have to use an API service to get new currency exchange rates. And that is obviously a very, very simple example. There are apps that use all kinds of third-party APIs to kind of supplement and enrich their own data. And furthermore, even if you're thinking that perhaps your app is not going to be accessing any kind of third-party data and you're not going to be making any kind of API calls, the fact of the matter is that by getting this third-party data, you may make your app even better than it already was, right? You can head to a site such as Rapid API, and you can check out the tons and tons of API services that you can use in order to make your app better richer and more useful to your users, to your customers and or clients. And so this is something that you want to be thinking about right from the beginning, right from the onset, right from the start. When you're kind of thinking about that, think about what kind of third party data is going to be useful to my app, and what kind of third party data is going to make my app a lot better and a lot more valuable in the eyes of my customers. Once you've spent some time thinking about what kind of data your app is going to be using, whether this is going to be some exchange rates or weather or something else, the next thing you want to be thinking about is how and whether the APIs are supported inside of your no-code tool. Obviously, the majority of no-code tools support APIs. It's just some tools give you a certain level of support. Other tools give you a different level of support. Some tools you have to pay and upgrade to a different price point in order to have, a real access to being able to call third-party services via an API, whereas other tools, they don't have any limits. So that is something you want to be thinking about. And you definitely want to steer clear of tools that do not give you an API functionality. After all, we are living in a time where it's an absolute requirement for an app to make various API calls and get data from third-party services. And so if the tool that you're evaluating does not support APIs, then I would steer clear of that tool altogether. The next thing you want to ask yourself is whether the app you're building is going to be doing any kind of AI things. So whether that is generating text, generating images, picture recognition, image recognition, or any of the hundreds and thousands of things that you can do with AI these days. That is something that you want to be thinking about from the get-go, because depending on the kind of AI services your app needs, you will have to use third-party tools and third-party services to kind of give you that AI functionality. So as an example, here we are at openai.com, and OpenAI has some very, very interesting and very useful AI functionality, AI features that your app can access via an API. Another great site is called replicate.com. And here you can check out different models that you can leverage using your app, once again, using an API. So you can do things with images, you can do things with text, you can do things with music, audio, and you can combine all of that. So you can do things from, text to image, image to text, audio to text, text to audio, speech to text to speech, etc., etc. That is something you want to be thinking about right from the beginning. And obviously, if you include some of this feature, some of this functionality, and granted, we're living in a time where lots of people are building amazing, amazing AI services that leverage the tools that I've just mentioned. And so if you can somehow get some kind of interesting AI functionality into your app, that is definitely going to delight your users, as well as providing an immense amount of value. And I guarantee you that many of your users are going to take a look at some of the things that AI can do and some of the things that maybe your app will be able to do leveraging these AI services. And they're going to view this as nothing less than magic. So if there's a chance that you can implement some of these AI functionalities into your app, then definitely go for it. Last but definitely not least, another thing that you want to ask yourself when you're building your dream app is whether you're going to have situations where an app might need to run a long process, or whether an app is going to be doing some kind of a background process. So as an example, let's say you're building an app that needs to spend some time getting some input from the user. The user is going to be entering various information, but then it's going to take time and it's going to do some kind of calculation. So maybe it's going to use AI to generate something. Maybe it's going to connect to a third party service, or maybe it's going to do a combination of the above. But regardless what it's going to do, it's going to take time. This response is not going to be automatic, and it could require a couple of extra steps. Or perhaps you have a situation where you're building an app and the app needs to do something in the background. Maybe this is going to happen on a schedule. So maybe once a day, once a week, once every 2 weeks, or once a month, etc., etc. Or maybe it's going to happen in the response of some event. Regardless what the exact situation is, anytime you have something where the app needs to do without having direct input from the user, whether it's some kind of a long running task or a background task that happens on a schedule, you never want to build that kind of functionality with the no code tool that you're using. They're not really meant to do that. And so a very quick example is, let's say you're building an Airbnb clone. So you have that whole flow that the user is doing on your app. But then when the user finishes booking the apartment, they finish booking the residence. One great feature is for the app to remind the user maybe 48 hours before the user checks into that apartment or into that room, remind them of their itinerary, tell them, here's the contact of the host, things like that. Something like this, you really cannot implement using a no-code builder, because that is an event that happens when the user is not using that app. And so that is a perfect example when you need to be using integration tools. And obviously there are many, many more examples of this sort. There's so many things that you can do and so many ways of providing value to your users when the user is not sitting in front of the computer. Maybe you are, looking up for better deals. Maybe it's a flight booking app and you found a better deal long after the user, tried to search for different deals on your site. So there are tons and tons of examples. And in this case, you want to be using an integration tool. And obviously, there are lots and lots of awesome integration tools. Here are a couple that I would highly recommend. The first one is Zapier.com here. Another one is IFTTT. And another tool that I really like is called Make.com. It used to be called Integromat, so maybe you've heard about before. But really what these tools do is they allow you to offload a lot of these background and long running processes, meaning when the user is not directly interacting with your app, to these tools instead of trying to kind of mix and match them and kind of build them using a no-code builder. And that is because no-code builders are not designed for these tasks. Now, depending on the complexity of the app you're going to be building, perhaps you're also going to be including more functionality, more features, and that's going to require different tools, different plugins, and different assets that your apps and your tools are going to be interacting with. But in the majority of the cases, following this step-by-step plan is going to allow you to build an awesome app that's going to deliver awesome value to your users without the extra headache and missed sleep. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video and you are looking to take your no-code game to the next level, you want to build that amazing app this year, or you want to build multiple apps, perhaps you want to freelance for other companies, or you want to start your own software business, you definitely want to check out my Patreon page. On my Patreon page, not only will you get access to all the FlutterFlow apps that I've built on this channel, but you also get access to extra content such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and my exclusive masterclass series where we do a deep dive on specific areas, specific topics that a lot of people need clarification on. Plus, by joining my awesome Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, which is highly appreciated. So definitely check out the link to our amazing Patreon community in the description and consider becoming a member. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video, check out the video in the corner that you're seeing right now. That is going to be the perfect video that you should watch next when it comes to overall no-code strategies that you need to internalize in order to build amazing apps this year.